Beatles Klingar. In this video, I'm going to talk about how influential the Beatles were, and we're going to pack our luggage and join the journey of the history of the Beatles. I mean, we're going to discuss from the beginning to the 1970s when the Beatles broke up. So, are you ready to join me? We're going to start with the Quarrymen because first of all, the Beatles weren't the Beatles, they were the Quarrymen. And at the beginning, when they formed this band, John Lennon formed it, and afterwards he met Paul McCartney and he asked him if he wanted to join the band, and he said yes, of course. And they played at local gigs in Liverpool, their hometown, and then George came. At that time they were like teenagers from around 13 to 16 years old, and this period of time it wasn't Ringo, their drummer. They didn't have the happiest childhood, so I think maybe they found this comfort in music and in one another and their bandmates, because John Lennon was raised by his Aunt Mimi, and I remember this specific detail that I think is very amazing and important in his career and life, that when he was little and he went to school, he used to write poems and short poems, and he hid them behind his bed, and his Aunt Mimi, when he cleaned the house, he found them and threw them, and John Lennon said to his Aunt Mimi that he'll become famous and one day she'll regret that she threw all his poems away. John Lennon's mother died when he was like very, very little. His father abandoned him, and he remembered this from his mother. He said that his mother told him that if he's happy, then that's the most important thing. And then when he went to school, he had made an assignment about what he wanted to be when he would grow up, and he said happy, and the teacher said to him that he didn't understand the assignment, and John Lennon said, "No, I don't think you understand life, because I want to be happy." And I mean, that's such a quote, and I think we should all guide our lives to being happy. No matter what we do, just be happy, But at first, when they were the Quarrymen, we didn't know the Beatles as the mop tops suit dress as we see here beside me, Paul McCartney. No, they were like very rock boys, and they didn't have this specific mop top. But afterwards, when Brian Epstein, their manager, went into this covering club where they used to play as the Quarrymen, and they saw their talent and their potential, he said that, "Oh, I'm going to manage you, to be your manager." But he said the first thing that we need to do is to change your looks, to have an impact. So he made like this kind of uniforms, I think, so they would all look the same, with suits and mop tops. And they started to develop their own music style and their own writing skill, because at that time the performers, they didn't write the songs themselves. They had other people to write for them, and they would only interpret, they would only perform. And it was such a big thing because the Beatles, they were writing their own songs. At first it was this collaboration between Paul and John, the Lennon McCartney, and afterwards we see that from With Beatles, the album, we see the first song by George Harrison. They started to play in Germany, in France, and people started to know about them, and they were quite a bit, let's say, influential at that time. And when they used to come back to play some gigs at a covering club in their hometown Liverpool, they were quite known there, and people started to talk about them, the four mop top guys that after a while would become the Fab Four, that the whole world would hear about. Everything changed from February 9th, 1964, when their career began to accomplish and to gain a lot of popularity, because on February 9th, 1964, they had the first appearance at the Ed Sullivan Show, and they had such an impact when they first went to New York. They had so many people, like a very, very big crowd of screaming girls waiting at the airport for them to arrive. I would say that this was the debut, the start of Beatlemania. Beatlemania used to describe this crowd of screaming girls that were obsessed with the Beatles, and it started to get like very, very known and popular. Beatlemania for teenage girls. You know, the Beatles were something fresh, something new that the world needed, you know, after the war and everything. The Beatles were like something very strange and very new. They composed their own music, they used to write their own songs, and they had this new looks that were so different at the time. They grew long hair. I mean, at the time, mop tops, they were like, long hair for boys was, you know, very weird. And of course, with Beatlemania, it came also the people that didn't like the Beatles, as you can also see it very clearly from the movie I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and that I would definitely recommend. It's just so amazing. It was impossible not to like the Beatles at the time, because they were literally everywhere. They had merch, they had movies, as we'll talk about. They had, like, they were everywhere, you know? It was impossible not to like them. The first movie was A Hard Day's Night, based on their album, and this was also something unusual at the time, because people didn't used to play themselves. They were played by actors, and the Beatles weren't actors. They used to play themselves. They played themselves in movies, and that was something unusual. They not only had one movie, but three. The first one, A Hard Day's Night, the second one, Help, of course with the name of the album, and the third one was The Magical Mystery Tour, which was filmed like in the 1967, something like that, after their manager Brian Epstein died in his 30s. It was very traumatizing for the Beatles, because Brian Epstein wasn't only their manager, but also like a friend of the Beatles, and was very traumatizing for them to hear that Brian died. They heard it when they were in India, and we're going to talk about the India incident just in a few moments, because it's something very, very, you know, curious about this event in the Beatles' time, that even now is very mysterious, and people haven't discovered everything about this incident. After this big Beatlemania that manifested almost everywhere in the world, it came a period in the life of the Beatles that wasn't so fortunate, because in a day in March of 1966, in an interview, John Lennon said that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. He said that, "I don't know which will come first, Christianity or rock and roll," which had such a great impact on their lives and their career. Like, from that moment, they went downfall with everything, their popularity and everything. People started to burn their merch and the vinyls, their, everything that was related to the Beatles. And first of all, it was misinterpreted because John Lennon didn't compare the Beatles with Jesus Christ, as he said in an interview, but kind of hard after the people read it in newspapers and everywhere. The popularity of the Beatles went downfall, and they started to have less and less concerts, because it was like very traumatizing for them as well, because they went to play and they see people making this big fires in front of them at their concerts, burning their merch and vinyls and albums and everything, and they've stopped. They took like a break. People thought at that time it was the end of the Beatles, but it wasn't. They would make a comeback, but at this moment they had a break. Paul went to the farm, had a holiday farm at the time, and George Harrison went to an India trip that would have such a great impact on his writing, as we see in Tomorrow Never Knows, or Blue Jay Way, for example. And now we're going to talk about the India incident, which it was like in 1966, 1967, when the Beatles spent some weeks in India, and which is very mysterious, this trip of the 4 Liverpool lads, because that period of time changed them forever. As I've said before, it changed George, but not only George Harrison with his writing skills, but all the bandmates. Maybe it was because of Brian Epstein's death, or who knows. 1968, the Beatles visited India to study transcendental meditation with Mark Hishing, and in that time they felt this spiritual growth, which inspired a lot of tracks on the White Album, such as Mother Nature's Son or Dear Prudence. But not only this, I think it had a lot of influence also on all the albums that came after, such as Magical Mystery Tour or Sgt. Pepper album. These years, 67, 68, changed the Beatles forever. Their looks, their appearance, their everything. When they came back to record their next album in the studio, they had all this developed different looks. George Harrison had clothes inspired by India culture, and Paul McCartney developed this colorful sweaters and everything that he wore, his style. John Lennon grew long hair, longer than the mop tops, and Ringo started wearing many jewels, rings and everything, which was very, very different for that time. Very unusual for men to be very, very different than the rest of the others, like wearing jewels was only for women, and from 1968 the Beatles grew apart from each other. Each one had their own families. George Harrison was with Pattie Boyd, Ringo Starr with Maureen, and John Lennon, after divorcing Cynthia, he married Yoko Ono. He had a son with Sean. And in 1969, in the recording studio, it became like very cool and very, this tension that you can feel if you watch Get Back, the series, or Let It Be. But I would recommend Get Back, because in Let It Be there are a lot of scenes that are cut out and left out, and there are 3 episodes. I think it's like 3 hours, so 9 hours in total, the series. But you can see very clearly this tension between the bandmates and how they start to broke the Beatles. Like, the Beatles would come to an end. You can see how George Harrison left the band. He was the first one that was like, I don't want to do this anymore, because he said in an interview that the relationship between Lennon and McCartney grew very big. I mean, they didn't seem like a band at all if you watch Get Back. They seem like pieces, pieces only put together in a studio, the Apple studio. But as you can see, after George Harrison left the band, everything goes wild. If you watch Get Back, which I completely recommend, everything goes wild. I mean, everyone loses their mind and nothing stays on track, because the Beatles aren't the Beatles without a Beatle, And as George Harrison said in an interview, that the Beatles will be forever, even without the Beatles. Their legacy and everything will still be and continue. And he was right. George Harrison was such a smart and intelligent person. I think everything was influenced, let's say, by the transcendental meditation with Marikishi and his stay in India, which he converts to Hinduism. Hinduism. And I watched a lot of interviews with George Harrison, and they're mind-blowing, and they change your life forever, your perspective on life. I totally recommend to watch interviews with George Harrison, because he says some things that people don't see, people don't understand, that life is so precious and so short, that we run all our lives and at the end we realize that nothing was important, that only happiness is the most important thing in life, and that you have to live with memories, not with regrets. He's such a wise person. I mean, George Harrison inspired me writing my book, as I'm writing a book myself, and he's my biggest inspiration in it, in writing it, and in life especially. He's my idol. I don't want to be a musician, but no matter what you want to be, the Beatles are idols. They're a whole legacy. They're the music industry. And now, by the way, I hate when people compare the Beatles with Taylor Swift. Just stop doing that. I'm not hating on Taylor Swift. I'm not hating on Swifties. I like her. I mean, I sometimes listen to Taylor Swift. She's good. She has a lot of albums. But please stop comparing them. Because you just can't. For example, the Beatles are the whole world. They are the everything. They are the music industry, because if it wasn't for the Beatles, we wouldn't have had Taylor Swift, we wouldn't have had Elton John, or Fleetwood Mac, or Pink Floyd, or Queen, or Blondie, or I don't know, all the artists that came after like Billie Eilish, Lady Gaga, a Taylor Swift, even Taylor Swift, because Taylor Swift's idol is Paul McCartney, you know. So just stop comparing. Because people say, oh yes, but she's just one woman, there are four of them, the Beatles. But Taylor Swift has social media and, you know, a lot of help with it because she lives nowadays and it's a lot easier. So yeah, please remember when you say that Taylor Swift is bigger than the Beatles, because she's not. If it wasn't for the Beatles, you wouldn't have had Taylor Swift, you know. And they're like the greatest band of all time. If you don't matter if you don't like them, they will have always been, and they would always be the biggest band in the whole world, you know, because they didn't only play one genre of music. It is wrong to say, oh, the Beatles are a rock band. They are kind of a rock band, but they didn't only play rock. They played like blues, like pop, all sorts of music. They developed, you know, this style and everything that is so unique, you know. And all they recorded together for 7 years. 7 years that changed the whole world, the whole universe, you know. The Beatles' last performance was in 1969, the rooftop performance, which you can see and watch in Get Back series, and last episode, the third episode, and it just scrumptious. But that was very sad because it was their last performance together ever. Afterwards, the Beatles broke up. Yeah. They met as friends, but not as the Beatles. They didn't want to remake the Beatles, you know, to reunite as bandmates. But they were still friends. Up until John Lennon's murder in 1980. That was so sad and traumatizing for everyone. Not only the third remaining Beatles, but also for the whole world. The whole world wept for and cried for John Lennon, the Nowhere Man, that will always remain in our hearts and in our minds. There are so many things and interesting facts to discuss about the Beatles, but I don't have enough time right now. So the next video will be about the theory, the Paul is dead theory, the Paul McCartney. And we're going to discuss all these clues, you know, and proofs that people found. And yes, we're going to discuss more about the subject in our next video. And see you next time. Now I'm going to show you where I got all my information and all these facts that I know about the Beatles. So first of all is this book, The Beatles, the only ever authorized biography by Hunter Davis. It looks like this, and as you can see, it's very thick, and there are a lot of interesting facts about the Beatles. If you want to know more about them, you can read this book. I really recommend it. It's amazing. Then we have the Paul McCartney book, the lyrics. It's 1956 to the present. All the songs that he wrote, and with stories about his life. And as you can see, this because are very quotable. This book is amazing, and it's kind of very thick. It has around 600 pages, but it's an easy read because, as you can see, there are not a lot of things on these pages, but a lot of information that if you're a Beatlemaniac, you can read this book. I totally recommend it. And also you have a lot of pictures, photographs, lyrics here that he wrote, songs that he wrote before the Beatles, during the Beatles, and after the Beatles, Wings, his solo career, everything you need to know about this amazing musician's life. And afterwards we have this. This is Little and Petite. This is the Beatles' Life in Music. What was Beatlemania? John, Paul, George, and Ringo. In here you don't have many information. This is for like the beginners. You know, it has a lot of basic information, and you have a discography here, albums, release, title, UK chart position, weeks in chart, US chart position, and weeks in chart. So these 3 books that I have are from where I got all the information of the Beatles. And if you want to watch movies, as I've told you, A Hard Day's Night, Help, The Magical Mystery Tour, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. I Want to Hold Your Hand, it was a movie that I think was recorded around after the 80s, I think, or during the 80s it was recorded. And it describes this Beatlemania very clearly and beautifully, and yeah, such a great movie. But in the 3 of them, and Yellow Submarine, but Yellow Submarine is kind of confusing because it's very this psychedelic rock time, a period of time of the Beatles when their song was influenced by LSD. And yes, LSD, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, but Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds wasn't inspired by LSD. That was inspired by John Lennon's son Julian drawing when he came from kindergarten, and he showed his father drawing, and his father said, "Oh, what is this?" And he said, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," and he said, "Oh my God, that's amazing," you know. And afterwards he wrote a song. It's not inspired by LSD, but the other songs are inspired by LSD. So yeah, A Hard Day's Night, Help, Magical Mystery Tour, and Yellow Submarine. The Beatles are starring in these movies. They're playing themselves, but in I Want to Hold Your Hand, they're proper actors, but they're amazing, and you can clearly watch this development of Beatlemania. So yeah.